Thanks for joining us at the Business Growth Cafe, where each week we select from a menu of topics for a focused discussion with an industry expert to provide insights that can impact your business's growth. With your host, Angelo Ponzi.
I am Angelo Ponzi, your host here at the Business Growth Cafe, and thank you for joining us. Each week we select from a menu of topics that can impact business growth to discuss with experts on a wide variety of disciplines. And today at the cafe, I'm actually going to be talking to you about the importance of planning for business growth. Now, this is a topic that's near and dear to me. As of this morning, before I came in, there are 350 days left in this year. Hopefully you've already started your planning process, and this will be just kind of some insights to help you polish up what you've been working on. But if you haven't started your planning for this year, you're a little behind, and hopefully this show that you're going to listen to will help you out. Now, planning is really interesting because when I talk to clients, the planning part is easy, right? Planning for growth is easy. We can sit around and we can talk about it. But making it happen, now that's really the challenge, because unfortunately, implementation is the biggest part of all of this. We can talk, we can plan, we can do all sorts of things. But unless we actually implement and manage that implementation, it's all for naught. Right, I had some guests on last week. We talked about her strategic efforts that they do, and she gets weekly reports and quarterly updates to make sure they are staying on plan. So it's really important. So let's talk a little bit about this. If you think about planning for growth, I always recommend a 3-year plan. Right, 1 year is a little too in close. Looking at 5 years, at 4 and 5, you're just kind of guessing at stuff. But at 3 years, you can really sit down and put some real effort into making this happen. And looking at what you're currently doing or what you did last year, for example, and using your projections off of that, you have a ton of data in your organization. We tend to forget about utilizing that data, but that data is really important because you can go back into history and look at how your growth happened to go. You can look at things that took you off track, if you will. And so those are really important in setting your goals for next year. And the other important thing is getting buy-in from your staff. You can't do it on your own if you're the marketing guy or the CEO of the company. You have to have the other people involved, your sales teams. They're the one out talking to the customers. They're the other ones out gathering the information. So having buy-in, having participation really helps ensure that when you do implement your plan, you have full cooperation from everybody on your staff. But as you know, as a business owner, the road is not always straight. A lot of bumps and curves and twists and turns. And so it's never a smooth ride. And that's why it's important to have some kind of monitoring in place so you can keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on in your marketplace to make sure you can react accordingly. Now, 97% of business leaders claim that their companies fail to reach their strategic goals through poor implementation. I'm going to repeat that. 90% of business leaders claim their company fails to reach strategic goals due to poor implementation, right? So it's really stressing what I've been talking about. It's not necessarily the planning part, it's the implementation. In fact, 53% of those same executives think the execution challenges unnecessarily hamper their ability to compete. Now, this is really important because, again, it's a buy-in, it's an incorporation. You can't set too lofty goals that you can't meet, and you can't not have buy-in from your staff, whether it's marketing or sales or frankly HR and all the different things that can impact your road to growth. Because all these different things that are out there, and I talk about market dynamics, can have an impact on the growth of your business. So if we think about that road to growth, right, there's a lot of offshoots, things that can happen. Sales, marketing, employees, finance, operations, all those things have an impact on what you're doing. However, you have to pay attention to the external factors, if you will, the market dynamics in which we're competing, the competition, technology changes, economy, changes in the economy, politics. We have a lot of stuff going on right now in the U.S. here that are having a dramatic impact on small businesses and how they can borrow money, how they can keep operations open and things like that. So it's really important that you look at the total picture and not just internally, not just talking to the salespeople, but really understanding that broader picture of those things that can impact what you're doing. Now, one of the things I'd like to challenge you on is how would you rate yourself? How do you feel you're doing as a business or how you did last year? For example, do all of your employees understand the unique value propositions And can they clearly articulate them? Do you delegate those non-essentials as a business leader, or do you tend to want to kind of do it all yourself? Are marketing, sales, messaging on track in making sure that everybody is articulating their particular value proposition? Do you conduct regular employee meetings so they can understand the KPIs, and again, getting that buy-in time after time? What about the annual plan? Do you plan once a year? Do you monitor it semi-annually? Do you look at it quarterly? How are you doing that to make sure everybody is buying in? And as this conversation is going, do you have a 3-year strategic roadmap? Now, the one that I want to really stress right now is the voice of the customer. My background, I have a market research background, and I always say when I talk about this, I see my clients, they have big dollar signs in their eyes, and their idea is this is just going to be really expensive. But it doesn't have to be expensive, but it is so crucial that you understand the needs, wants, motivations, behaviors of your target customers, whether they're current customers or whether they're prospective customers, right? You can't work in this vacuum. If you're just sitting around the conference table and you and your management staff are just talking ideas back and forth and have all this great information and the way you want to grow your business, and you have no idea how that's going to resonate into the marketplace, you're doing yourself a disservice. So if you think about how you would rate yourself today and making those changes as we go forward. So here at the Business Growth Cafe, one of the questions we always ask our guests is what keeps you up at night? And one of the consistent answers has been pipeline. So that's sales, making sure that there's constant sales in the pipeline, because you don't win everything you go after. And that also generates cash and cash flow for your business as well. So when you think about pipeline and you have, a big pipeline goal and you got your sales folks out there and, the goal is prospect. So then you have to evaluate, again, back to that historical aspect of what you have in your organization that says how many of these prospects are going to turn into customers. One of my clients has been working on these ratios, and they know in certain cases that 30% of all the proposals that they put out, they will land. Has been very consistent over the last several years. So we're able to actually forecast how much proposals, how much revenues and dollars they have to put in their proposals in order to turn that into revenue. And then also, how long does it take? All right, if we go out and we sell a widget today and they go on the internet and they buy it and they get it in 7 days, well, that didn't take very long. But if you have a long lead cycle, right, you start today, but the sale of the product and the revenue doesn't come in for 6-8 months from now, you also have to factor that in, because again, back to things like cash flow and how do you keep your business afloat as you're going through these. They all become very important. And the other thing is company culture that I want to talk about a little bit. It's really important that you step back and think about the culture of your organization. Is it a nurturing one? Is it one that inspires and motivates? Or is it one that deflates and degrades? And that sounds silly, but it does happen. So it's really important that you really put a check. And you can do some of that by talking to your customers. I mean, not your customers, but talking to your employees, your customers too. But remember, you as the business owner, it starts with you. It starts at the top and works its way down. You have to have that driven from the top in order to have a strong culture and the importance of that culture. So today we're talking a little bit about business growth, which in turn goes back to sales. And I'm a big believer that new business is the lifeblood of any business, right? New business is the lifeblood. It's really important that you're constantly looking for those new prospects, right? Because you want the renewals, and you can certainly sustain yourself with the renewals, but your growth is going to be much slower than if you're adding new blood, if you will, into the organization. So when you think about that, you could break it down into your developing strategies of, say, current customers and new customers. Now, one of the things I talked about, and actually have a blog on my website about it, is a strategy for selling more, sell for more, or to sell to more. So if you think about that, sell more. Those would be kind of retention strategies, increasing volume with existing customers, generating new users of existing products, and stimulating current users to buy more. One of the things I've noticed in a lot of the interviews that I've done with target customers myself and people that I've been interviewing, a lot of them will admit that their current customers have no idea about the products and services that they sell. They know what they buy, but when you really start to sit down and talk to them about the breadth of those services and products that you sell, they have no idea. So just selling more from that strategy, if they knew you had more products and services to sell and you could just sell them a little bit more, you're going to increase revenue without very much difficulty, right? It's easier to retain existing customers than it is to generate new ones. Sell for more is always an interesting aspect because now we're talking about pricing. And pricing can be an uphill battle. But if you think about why they selected your company in the first place, it was based on value, not really on price. Now, certainly if there are a bunch of commodities, that pricing might have been a big factor. But at the end of the day, there's value in what you offer. And you have to constantly remind your customers about that value. You don't want to let the competition get in because you're not continuing reinforcing that. And what you don't want to do is start to be competing on price. So value propositions and understanding what that is and why they hired you in the first place and why they should continue to use you becomes very important. And then sell to more, right? That's that acquisition strategy. Users that maybe are using similar products and services as yours, but just not you. Well, they become a likely target because maybe the competition is doing everything I'm telling you not to do, and they're doing those things. So they're leaving themselves wide open for opportunities for you to slide in and take competition from them. So looking at those ways to acquire businesses, whether it's in the current marketplace that you're in, so new customers there, or looking at vertical opportunities, market segments that you've never even been in before that you can sell your products and services to. So those are just a simple strategy as a way to help think about growing your business. Now, customer relations, we talked about that a little bit and really understanding your customer. And in customer centricity, if you will, a customer-focused strategy becomes very important. You have to understand the needs, wants, motivations, behaviors of your customers. I've always talked about buyer personas. Unfortunately, a lot of small and medium-sized organizations don't spend the time to really build those buyer personas. But it's really important. And I'll just say one thing. Imagine you're a software company and you're selling software to an organization. There's someone who looks at you and says, I want to initiate that we need this new software. Then there's somebody who may be evaluating that software, and they may not be the same people. And then ultimately, there's someone who's going to write the check. They may be 3 different people in the same organization, but if you're only messaging to one and only delivering the same message, you might be missing the boat. So buyer personas and understanding who those people are that you're trying to reach. Account-based marketing is really coming on strong and understanding ups and downs, if you will, from the vertical standpoint and horizontally within organizations, and really concentrating on how you really understand and can get the biggest bang for your buck in targeting those organizations. Teach your customers how to effectively buy. And that gets back to that relationship that you have with them. If they understand who you are and the value that you bring, the next step is to make sure that they see you as the best way to buy, the way you have that relationship with them. Don't be turned into a vendor. It's very important because then you start down that road of being a commodity. Now, one of the things that we think about business growth, another aspect is employees. Without sales, we have nothing. Without employees to get those sales, we have nothing. Right now, about 85% of the workforce in the U.S. is disengaged or unhappy in the jobs that they're in. That translates to about $450 to $500 billion annually and $7 trillion in lost productivity. Hopefully, none of that falls onto your organization, but that becomes extremely important of how you treat your employees. Looking at your onboarding process. What's that process to get them on, get them trained to make sure that they can go out, sell your products and services and really understand, become real true brand ambassadors of your organization. Right now, the statistics show that 34% of new hires are leaving in the first 90 days. So you just spent a lot of money recruiting, training, bringing them on, introducing them to your customers, and then they leave. So that process of really looking at how you hire the right people, right? Jim Collins, making sure you have the right people on the bus and making sure that the people you have on the bus are in the right seats. So spend time really looking at that onboarding process, the recruiting process, to make sure that the people you're bringing on are there for the long term, because they do have a tremendous impact on the growth of your organization. Happy and engaged workers are 34% more productive. They sell 37% more, 21% higher profitability, 41% lower absenteeism, 59% less turnover, 70% less safety issues, and 40% fewer defects and quality issues. So happy and engaged workers are automatically going to increase their productivity and increase the benefit for your organization. Spend the time, invest the time to make sure they're happy and engaged. When you think about this, then all these different aspects that I've been talking about is removing these obstacles to growth. There are so many barriers that you're going to face, but you need to have to continually knock down the wall and to look for those kinds of opportunities that you can pursue. I like to use a quote by James Cash Penney, which is J.C. Penney. Growth is never by mere chance. It is the result of forces working together. Right? Growth is never by mere chance. It is a result of forces working together. And that goes back to what I said in the very beginning of this conversation. You have to have buy-in from your team, and this is a team effort. You have to make sure that your sales teams, your operations teams, your HR teams, and anything else in your organization, your accounting teams, are all working together to make sure when you're putting your plan together, it is as strategic as possible and your best chance for opportunities for success. Now, one of the things I'd like to start to wind this down is you need to make time to plan. And a recent survey that I had conducted, the senior leadership said they spend less than 5% of their time working on their business. That's 5%. So I just spend more time probably talking about planning than they spend each month working on their plan. So it's really important that you invest the time, because if you as the business owner or the CEO or depending on your type of corporation that you are, nobody else is going to do that. Starts at the top. Leadership starts at the top. So you have to set that time aside to make sure you're investing and working on your business for the future. Understanding the needs and behaviors of your customers and prospects. Now, I think I've beaten this to death a little bit, but I'm going to beat it some more. It is so important that you take the time to do a little research. Now, as I said, research doesn't necessarily need to be expensive. If you have a customer service department in your organization, you have people calling in. They're telling you problems or issues or needs or wants. All you need to do is listen into those. Those are going to give you strong indications about what's going on in your marketplace. And you can start to see patterns and replicate those. Go out and do qualitative research. Now, qualitative could be nothing more than picking up the phone and calling your customers and talking to them. Make sure it's structured, however. Ask the same set of questions to everybody to make sure you're not adding additional bias. But finding out what those customers are thinking about is extremely important. A few years ago, I conducted a study for one of my clients. We talked to 25 of their customers around the country, and the insights that we received from those conversations really helped set the tone, not only about what we wanted to do in the future, about what we were doing wrong now. What we did find out in those conversations is senior management was not staying in touch with their clients enough. So they were leaving themselves open to competitive pressures. Determine what your competition is doing as we talk about competitive pressures. Now, I'm a big believer in competitive intelligence. As a matter of fact, on my website, if you're listening, I have an ebook on establishing a competitive intelligence program. I'm a firm believer that you have to look at your competitors from a wide variety of areas, whether it's messaging, understanding what they're saying in the marketplace and what you're saying in the marketplace. Are you saying the same thing? Are you using the same words and phrases? How do you differentiate yourself from those competitors? Well, you can't do that in a vacuum. You could think you have the best messaging, the best strategy, the best positioning, and then only to launch your new campaign, only to find out that your top competitor is already saying it out there. So it's important as you go into each year is to look at your competition. But I said each year, but what I really want to say is on at least a quarterly basis. You have to identify who your top tier and your second tier competitors are. It doesn't take much each month to make sure, did they change the messaging on their website? Have they rolled out any new products or services? Just go set it up for Google Alerts. Anytime they appear in the news, you're going to get a notice about it, and then you can go investigate. It's easy to gather information it's difficult to utilize that information. So if you do set up a competitive intelligence program, make sure that part of that is how do you put that information into use within your organization. And then part of that, if we continue on, is about implementation, monitoring, and adjusting. You don't start it today and revisit it a year from now. I jokingly say, but it wasn't a joke, when I was in the advertising business, I remember we went in for a semi-annual review for one of my clients, and we brought our plans with us, and the client reached over to his bookshelf, pulled the plan off the shelf, and literally blew the dust off it. So while we were moving and making progress, they just weren't paying attention to all the details that were in the plan. The other thing I want to say about planning is so many times we focus on externally and we forget the internal audience, the employees. I worked for an organization where we used to have monthly staff meetings, and they called it the state of the state, and they would talk about the wins, the losses, and things that were going on to make sure everybody in the organization had a buy-in. And we had 85 people in the organization at the time. So they weren't small meetings, but they were important meetings because nobody was walking around saying things that wasn't true. Everybody was on the same page as everybody in the organization. And we worked pretty strategically together, and that organization thrived for many, 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 many years. So when I think about planning then, I guess my simplest advice is take the time. Step back, draw yourself a road. Last week we had Joe Don Whitlock Karnowski on, and she talked about a strategy tree. Thought that was really, really interesting. There's a new blog on my website about that. And just find a framework that works for you to set those foundations. Where are you today? Where do you want to be tomorrow? And start, what are those strategic initiatives to help you get there? And then what are those tactics that are going to get you there as well? Right? You have to think these things out. You have to make sure that you take the time to work on your plan in order for success in the long term. I'm Angelo Ponzi, your host here. You can reach me at theponzigroup.com or on LinkedIn. On Facebook, you can watch our show videos. You can also subscribe to this channel at thebusinessgrowthcafe.com. We are also on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, Streaker, SoundCloud, and iHeartRadio coming soon, and many, many others around the world. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for listening to today's discussion at the Business Growth Cafe with your host, Angelo Ponzi. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast and visit our website at www.businessgrowthcafe.com. Read Angelo Ponzi's blogs at www.theponzigroup.com.
Imagine what it would feel like to lose everything: your job, your home, your